houses and stuff. And it's like, am I seeing this crazy, or do y'all see them? You want them in your house? You know, back in the day, we'd be like, they can't come in my house. They don't even look right. You know, that their tooth look funny. You know, the tooth look funny. So it's like, now they got all kind of stuff embedded in their heads, and you know, these.
Yeah.
Something strange happens when you trace the lives of some R&B legends back far enough. Before the fame, before the hits, before the chaos, almost all of them start in the same place, the church. Then something breaks. Not all at once, but slowly. As success grows, faith gets replaced by fear. Some of these artists believed God stopped listening. Others believed God was watching every move. And a few believed they crossed lines that could never be uncrossed. Lines that demanded punishment instead of forgiveness. And once you hear how these stories connect, you may never listen to their music the same way again. James Brown. James Brown's life started with discipline, ruthless discipline. He believed control was survival, precision was respect, weakness was dangerous. From rehearsals to performances, James demanded perfection. People feared him, but they also followed him because he delivered results. Over time, control stopped being a tool and became an identity. James wanted obedience everywhere, in his home, in his relationships, in his business dealings. And the more powerful he became, the more paranoid he grew about losing that power. Friends noticed that James talked constantly about betrayal, about being set up, about people watching his money. Violence entered his relationships not as impulse, but as enforcement. Adrienne was trapped inside James' need to dominate. Police reports documented repeated abuse, but James believed something else entirely. He believed fear kept order, and order kept him safe. Behind that behavior was something deeper. James believed exposure meant destruction. Rumors of illegal money flows, unreported cash, and backroom deals followed him for years. James believed if those secrets surfaced, punishment would follow. Not just legally, spiritually. He talked about owing something, paying something back. When Adrienne tried to leave, James panicked. According to people close to her, she hinted she knew things, that she'd seen things she shouldn't have. After that, she reportedly told friends she felt watched, that strange cars sat outside their home, that she was scared. Her death was officially ruled a medical complication, but those close to James never accepted that explanation. James himself never seemed at peace afterward. He became more erratic, more suspicious, more haunted. He told his manager later that he'd destroyed her spirit, and he believed that counted. From that moment on, James spoke openly about debt. Not financial, moral, spiritual. He believed power itself had become his god, that he'd worship control more than anything else. And like any false god, it demanded payment. In his final years, James feared sudden death. He warned people not to trust official stories if something happened to him. He spoke about men in suits, about being silenced. Whether those fears were real or imagined mattered less than the fact that he believed them. His final confession was exhausted. He said he paid for his sins, not that he was forgiven, not that he was free, just that the cost had been collected. James Brown built an empire through rhythm and dominance, but he died believing that power, once worshipped, always demands sacrifice. Luther Vandross. Luther Vandross voice-filled arenas, but his real life stayed quiet, controlled, and carefully hidden. From the outside, he looked protected, successful, safe. But the truth is, Luther spent most of his adult life afraid of being seen. That fear didn't come from nowhere. Luther was raised with faith. Church taught him structure, discipline, and the idea that love was sacred. But as his career grew, those same spaces became complicated. The message slowly shifted. God might forgive, but people wouldn't. The industry definitely wouldn't. Luther learned early that honesty could cost him everything. Record executives didn't need to threaten him directly. The pressure was subtle and constant. Image mattered. Fans expected romance, but only one kind. The industry sold Luther as the ultimate love song voice for women, and anything that disrupted that fantasy was treated like danger. Luther understood the rules clearly. One wrong move and the career he built would collapse. So he chose silence, not because he didn't feel love, but because loving openly felt sinful in the eyes of the world he depended on. Luther believed God would understand his heart, but he wasn't sure the industry ever would. That split shaped his entire adult life. On stage, he poured emotion into songs about intimacy and devotion. Off stage, he kept his real feelings locked away. People close to Luther noticed how guarded he was. He avoided questions about his personal life. He kept his circle small. He edited himself constantly. Even jokes were calculated. He knew how fast rumors spread, and he knew how quickly success could disappear. After his stroke in 2003, something changed. The control slipped. The walls cracked. Friends and assistants described moments where Luther became emotional without warning. Crying quietly, staring off, holding on to old journals and photographs. The fear that had kept him silent for decades started to weigh heavier than the risk of speaking. That's when Luther made his most painful admission. He told people close to him that he had loved deeply and never said it out loud. Not once, not publicly, not privately in the way he needed to. He framed it as grief for a life he never lived. He believed the silence had cost him something permanent. Rumors followed him for years about who that love was. Another artist, a bandmate, someone from his early career. Luther never confirmed anything, but what mattered was the loss. He believed he had obeyed the world instead of himself, and that obedience had slowly hollowed him out. As his health declined, that realization became heavier. Luther reportedly said that his music made millions of people feel loved, but he never gave his love the same freedom. That contradiction haunted him, not as shame, but as sadness. When Luther died, the headlines focused on medical causes, but those who knew him believed something else played a role. The exhaustion of living unseen, the cost of treating honesty like a threat. Luther's final truth was quiet. He admitted he lived in the shadows and died there too. Ray Charles. Before the fame, before the drugs, before the money, Ray was a blind boy sitting behind a piano in Florida, surrounded by clapping hands, stomping feet, and shouted amens. In those churches, his blindness wasn't treated like a weakness. It was treated like proof. Elders said God had taken his eyes so he could see deeper. They laid hands on his head and spoke things over him that stayed with him for life. Ray believed them. He saw music as a gift with rules attached. As a teenager, Ray mastered gospel piano fast. People started whispering that he was dangerous. Dangerous because when he played, people cried, people fell out. People said they felt God move. And in churches like that, once people say God is moving through you, there's no room left to just be human. You're expected to stay clean, stay humble, stay inside the walls. The moment Ray stepped outside those walls, everything changed. When he started blending gospel chords with blues and R&B, the church saw theft. Sacred sounds were being dragged into smoky rooms filled with alcohol, sex, and money. One preacher reportedly told him that gospel belonged to God and blues belonged to the devil. And Ray was bold enough to play both with the same hands. Ray felt that split immediately. In interviews later in life, he admitted something most artists never say out loud. He said he felt like he took something holy and sold it. He believed he'd taken God's music and traded it for applause, fame, and desire. Every nightclub show felt like a transaction. Every cheer came with guilt attached. That guilt made him punish himself. Heroin entered Ray's life as control. Control over the noise inside his head. Control over the feeling that God had stepped away and left him alone with his choices. Ray later described addiction as a slow drowning, not because the drug was fun, but because it felt deserved. He believed that once God went silent, suffering was the natural consequence. People around him noticed something strange. Ray talked like a man paying a debt. The turning point came during a confrontation that Ray almost never discussed publicly. A pastor, someone who had known him before the fame, confronted him directly. He accused Ray of selling his soul, not in a playful way, not as gossip, as a warning. According to people close to Ray, the pastor told him that once sacred gifts are used for selfish gain, God withdraws. That silence, he said, was judgment. Ray never argued back. He never defended himself. He just stopped going to church. From that moment on, Ray kept God at a distance. Not because he stopped believing, but because he believed he had already been rejected. He avoided sanctuaries, avoided sermons, avoided conversations about forgiveness. He focused on work, on touring, on numbing the fear that he'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Then came detox. When Ray finally tried to get clean, the experience was terrifying. He spoke later about hallucinations during withdrawal, shadows that moved without sound, voices that questioned him. He said the worst part wasn't fear. It was silence. He prayed and felt nothing come back. At one point, Ray reportedly begged out loud not to be famous, not to be forgiven publicly, but simply for God not to leave again. Ray survived. He lived. He kept making music, but something in him stayed cautious. He never fully returned to the place where faith felt safe. And that leaves us with a question that pulls us into the next story. Because the next man didn't believe God went silent. He believed God was watching everything. Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye grew up wrapped in scripture but not comfort. His father was a preacher who believed discipline was devotion and fear was respect. Church was a courtroom. Every mistake felt recorded. Every desire felt suspicious. Still, Marvin absorbed gospel deeply. He was obsessed over judgment, sin, cleanliness, worth. Even as his voice made him famous, his mind stayed locked in moral accounting. Good deeds versus bad ones. Love versus violence. Faith versus failure. As Marvin's fame grew, so did his sense of spiritual imbalance. He wasn't just struggling with addiction and relationships. He believed he was actively angering God. He talked about it openly to people close to him. He said he felt cursed, not unlucky, cursed. Marvin saw his violence toward women, his infidelity, his cocaine use as evidence that something inside him had broken. He didn't excuse it. He punished himself for it. Friends noticed he would spiral after moments of success. A hit record didn't make him happy. It made him anxious. He believed the higher he climbed, the harder the fall would be. At one point, Marvin told a bandmate that the devil didn't need to chase him because he was already walking beside him. In the years leading up to his death, Marvin became fixated on the idea of payment. That suffering balanced the scale. That pain was required. He talked about dying young, about not deserving peace, about being tired of fighting himself. People around him thought it was depression or drug talk. They didn't realize he saw death as resolution. His final days were heavy. Marvin was exhausted, not just physically, spiritually. He believed he had reached the end of the road God had allowed him to walk. He believed judgment was coming, and resisting it would only make it worse. The confrontation with his father was years of resentment, fear, and guilt colliding at once. When Marvin pushed him, when he escalated the fight, witnesses later said, "It didn't feel like a man trying to survive. It felt like a man provoking something he'd already accepted." After the gunshot, as he lay bleeding, Marvin reportedly whispered words that reframed everything. He said he did it on purpose, that he wanted it to end, that he believed this was how it was supposed to go. And it pulls us toward the next story, because the next legend feared what happens when you learn something you were never meant to know. Donny Hathaway. Donny Hathaway was raised chasing truth. From the beginning, his life revolved around discipline, study, and faith. Classical piano training, deep gospel roots, a mind that moved faster than most people around him. Donny analyzed music, took it apart, put it back together, cleaner than before. People around him knew early that he wasn't normal talent. He was rare. But brilliance has a cost when it starts asking questions no one wants answered. As Donny moved deeper into the industry, he became obsessed with ownership. Who owned the masters? Who controlled the publishing? Why black artists made millions for labels but died broke? He studied contracts line by line. He challenged accounting numbers. He asked why songs he wrote were suddenly credited to other names. And the more he pushed, the more resistance he felt. That's when his language changed. Donny stopped talking about business problems and started talking about systems, control, surveillance, punishment. He believed the music industry wasn't just exploitative, but intentionally designed to trap artists who tried to break free. To Donny, this was pattern recognition. He believed once you saw the machinery clearly, you couldn't unsee it, and he believed seeing it came with consequences. The voices began around this time. Donny said they sounded mechanical, flat, repeating, like transmissions leaking through something damaged. He told people they weren't coming from inside him, but from outside, forcing their way in. Friends noticed how specific his fear was. He believed the punishment was exposure. Donny told Roberta Flack and others that the walls were compromised, that vents carried sound, that phones clicked because someone was recording. People assumed drugs or stress, but Donny's fear had structure, targets, reasons. He believed he had learned something about contracts, money, and power that crossed an invisible boundary. Spiritually, Donny framed this as forbidden knowledge. He believed there were truths artists weren't meant to see, and once you did, peace was removed. The voices, the fear, the pressure were the cost of knowing too much. In his final days, Donny looked resigned, calm in a way that frightened people more than screaming would have. When he walked out of his hotel room barefoot, no coat, no note, it felt deliberate. Like someone leaving a place that had become unbearable. His death was framed as escape from noise that never stopped, escape from a world where knowledge had turned into torment. To Donny, silence wasn't death. Silence was freedom. And that takes us to the next story, because the next legend feared being erased while still alive. Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston didn't grow up confused about God. She grew up immersed in Him. Church was home. Gospel was air. Whitney's earliest understanding of love came wrapped in faith. Sing for God. Live clean. Be grateful for the gift. For a long time, she believed those things lined up naturally. Then fame entered the room and rewrote the rules. As Whitney's voice carried her into global stardom, the expectations around her tightened. Family members, church leaders, executives, everyone agreed on one thing. She had to be perfect. Not spiritually honest, not emotionally real. Perfect. That meant smiling, being agreeable, being straight, being safe for America. Whitney's relationship with Robin Crawford didn't fit that image, and from the moment it became visible to the people managing her career, it was labeled a problem. Not because it was unhealthy, because it was inconvenient. Whitney was told directly and indirectly that the life she wanted would destroy the life they built for her. That's where obedience replaced salvation. Whitney stopped believing she was allowed to live truthfully in His presence. Every decision after that became an act of suppression. Hide this, replace that, perform happiness, perform normal. Marriage became camouflage. Smiles became armor. The silence that followed was violent. Whitney's addiction began as relief. Relief from being split in half. Relief from living as a symbol instead of a person. Drugs made her numb enough to keep going. Enough to survive another interview, another tour, another lie. People around her mistook chaos for self-destruction. But those close to Whitney saw something else. A woman suffocating under obedience. Every time she chose the career over herself, something inside her cracked. Not loudly, slowly. In private, Whitney admitted she felt she had betrayed the life she was meant to live. Not God directly. The life God gave her: love, safety, truth. She believed she had traded all of that for approval. And once that trade was made, she didn't know how to undo it. Her final days reflected that fracture. Witnesses described her pacing, restless, apologizing to people who weren't there, crying without explanation, not panicked, mourning, as if she knew time had run out to fix what obedience had broken. Whitney's final confession was quiet. She admitted she betrayed the only person who ever loved her without conditions. She didn't name names. She didn't need to. The weight of that realization followed her into the end. Whitney didn't die because she lacked strength. She died because she spent decades denying it. And that leads us forward, because the next legend invited Farkness in and let it take over. Rick James. Rick James was sharp, ambitious, and fully in control of who he wanted to be. He knew the image, he knew the sound, he knew how to dominate a room. By the late 1970s and early 80s, Rick was untouchable. Money, power, influence, and excess followed him everywhere. But Rick later said the moment everything changed had nothing to do with fame. It happened in a hospital room. After a brutal overdose in the early 1980s, Rick woke up convinced something had happened that couldn't be undone. Nurses remembered him screaming at the ceiling, thrashing as if someone else was in the room. Rick described it as an encounter. He told people a shadow had sat on his chest, heavy, deliberate, watching him. He said it stayed even after the drugs wore off. From that point on, Rick's language changed. He stopped talking about getting high for fun and started talking about emptiness, about not feeling fully inside his body. He told close friends that cocaine hollowed him out. He believed it created space, and whatever he encountered in that hospital room, he believed it had filled that space. Rick didn't say he was possessed in a movie sense. He said he felt vacant, like something essential had stepped away. In interviews later in life, he repeated the same line over and over, "Cocaine took my soul." As his addiction worsened, people around him noticed something unsettling. Rick would argue with empty corners. He accused rooms of listening. He pointed at shadows and told people not to move. Backup singers said he sometimes froze mid-conversation, staring at nothing, as if someone else had entered the space. Rumors started circulating about places Rick frequented: late-night studios, private houses in Laurel Canyon, rooms where people claimed rituals happened under the excuse of creativity or partying. Nothing was ever proven, but Rick himself fueled the stories. He told people he'd been summoned somewhere he didn't want to describe, that he'd agreed to things he shouldn't have. That success always comes with a price, and he'd paid it without reading the receipt. When the 1991 assault case happened, Rick's explanation was dissociation. He told Tina Marie and others that he didn't remember large parts of what he'd done, that it felt like watching someone else move his body. In court, prosecutors called him a monster. In private, Rick called himself empty. Prison brought fear. After his release, Rick told multiple people that the shadow had returned, that it never left. He believed whatever had attached itself during his addiction was permanent. He slept with the lights on. He woke up screaming. He said something tugged at him at night, pulling him back toward the same darkness. Rick James died with drugs in his system, but people who knew him insist that wasn't the real cause. They say the real cause was the belief that he'd crossed a line where responsibility ended and vacancy began. That once he stopped feeling human, he never figured out how to come back. Etta James. Etta came up in a time when Black women were punished for being too much, too loud, too dark, too heavy, too honest. She didn't fit the polished image executives wanted to sell, and instead of changing the system, they tried to break her into something easier to control. They failed, but not without damage. Producers humiliated her, forced her into diets, criticized her appearance, threatened her career when she pushed back. Etta later said she felt like she was constantly being corrected, reshaped, and punished for existing as herself. The message was clear: sing like a queen, but live like a servant. Her addiction came from exhaustion. Heroin became a way to dull the constant pressure, to quiet the anger, to escape a system that treated her pain like entertainment. Etta was trying to survive. Unlike others, Etta never pretended she was okay. She fought publicly. She argued with God openly. She admitted her bitterness. She believed suffering it was unfair, and she said so. What hurt her most was watching others succeed without punishment. Artists who fit the image. Artists who were protected. Artists who were allowed softness. Etta carried resentment toward them, not because she hated them personally, but because they represented a version of success she was denied. She believed the industry decided early who would be saved and who would be sacrificed. In private, Etta admitted she felt robbed of ease, robbed of dignity, robbed of the chance to fail quietly. Every mistake she made became public spectacle. Every relapse became proof that she was difficult. Meanwhile, the system that pushed her there remained invisible. As she aged, her body weakened, but her voice didn't soften. Even as Alzheimer's took pieces of her memory, one thing stayed sharp: defiance. She reportedly repeated the same belief near the end, that her voice was the only thing they never fully controlled. They could humiliate her, they could exploit her, but they couldn't take that. Bobby Womack's story starts with loyalty. Before the hits, before the scandals, Bobby was Sam Cooke's protege. Sam was a protector, a teacher, and to Bobby, something close to sacred. Sam took him in, gave him work, believed in him when nobody else did. In that world, loyalty was a bond, and Bobby broke it. When Sam Cooke was killed in 1964, the shock tore through black music like an earthquake. The details never made sense. The story never settled. But while the community was still grieving, Bobby did something that changed his life forever. He married Sam's widow, Barbara Cooke, just months after Sam's death. That decision horrified people. At Sam's funeral, Bobby showed up wearing Sam's clothes and Sam's ring. Whether that was grief, confusion, or poor judgment didn't matter. Sam's brothers saw it as unforgivable. They beat Bobby unconscious in the church. That moment rewired his mind. From that day on, Bobby believed he had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The marriage fell apart quickly, but the damage stayed. Bobby later admitted that he felt like he had violated something holy. Not just a friendship, a spiritual bond. Sam had trusted him, and Bobby believed that betrayal carried consequences beyond normal guilt. Then the rumors started. Bobby told people he saw Sam, not in dreams, awake, standing in rooms, sitting at the edge of beds, watching him. He described these moments as judgment. Sam never spoke in these visions. He didn't need to. Bobby believed the silence was the punishment. As Bobby's career continued, his behavior became erratic. Drugs, violence, affairs. He was spiraling. Each success felt undeserved. Each failure felt earned. People around him noticed that Bobby talked about Sam constantly, even decades later, as if time hadn't moved for him at all. There was another layer that made the guilt darker. From that point on, Bobby lived like a man doing penance. He punished himself through addiction, through reckless behavior, through self-sabotage. Whenever things started to stabilize, he would destroy them. Friends said it was like he didn't believe he deserved peace. And according to Bobby himself, he didn't. As he aged, the hallucinations intensified. Nurses later reported Bobby talking to someone who wasn't there, pointing at empty chairs, crying at night, saying he still heard Sam. Alzheimer's blurred many memories, but this one stayed sharp. The betrayal, the guilt, the sense that he had been marked. Near the end, Bobby stopped running from it. He reportedly accepted that some actions don't end when you apologize. Some bonds, once broken, don't heal. His final confession wasn't dramatic. It was resigned. He accepted that Sam's shadow would follow him forever. When you step back and look at all 9 stories together, a pattern starts to form. A pattern of belief. Each of these artists didn't just struggle with fame, they struggled with what replaced faith once they stepped outside its protection. What connects them is how seriously they took the idea of consequence. None of them described their suffering as random. They framed it morally, spiritually, as something earned, provoked, or unavoidable. Even when addiction, mental illness, or abuse were clearly present, the artists themselves interpreted those experiences through a spiritual lens. That matters, because it tells us this wasn't just about bad decisions or fame pressure. It was about people raised to believe actions echo beyond the physical world. That gifts come with responsibility. That crossing certain lines brings costs that money can't erase,